the CIA's impossible mission to steal a nuclear submarine. The ship is already groaning when the gauges jump. Steel sings. Then a jolt, like the ocean yanked back. 9,000 feet below, something tears free. On deck, nobody breathes. The claw still holds a piece, but most of the weight is gone. Somewhere in that black water are warheads, code machines, and 98 men who never came home. They'll say it's a mining test. They'll name-drop a billionaire. And they'll carry a coffin they can't show anyone. To see why a democracy built a ship that wasn't a ship and staged a funeral nobody could attend, we need to rewind. Can a democracy steal a nuclear submarine without starting a war? That's not theory. It's the tightrope the CIA walked when a Soviet Gulf II, K-129, vanished in March 1968 and never checked in again. On board, 3 ballistic missiles, cryptographic gear, a crew whose families would get silence instead of answers. If the Americans reached it first, they might see inside Soviet nuclear planning, missile guidance, metallurgy, maybe even codebooks. If they were caught, they could trigger a crisis no one could de-escalate in public. The KGB was hunting shadows. The CIA was betting on engineering. Inside the White House, deniability became a policy tool, not a shrug. And in a locked cabinet sat a tape of a burial at sea, Americans saluting Soviet dead 3 miles down. The question never went away. It only got louder at the moment the hull snapped, and every secret they wanted slipped back into the dark. Here's what the story reveals when the noise dies down. First, the ship that wasn't. A deep-sea mining venture wrapped around $1 billion heist. Second, the recovery that worked until it didn't. The claw closed. The lift began. Then brittle steel and bad luck rewrote the mission. Third, the funeral nobody saw, recorded on a tape that would embarrass the agency decades later, not for what it did, but for what it proved about truth and timing. We'll thread the codes, the nukes, and the redactions that still black out the page. To understand the theft, we start with a disappearance. We move in 5 beats. 1. The vanishing. K-129 misses its check-in. The Soviet Navy fans out and finds nothing, while a faraway American ear hears a single violent sound. 2. The audacious build. Howard Hughes's name becomes a mask. Front companies bloom. In a dock, steel rises into the Glomar Explorer. 3. The operation itself. Decoys, station keeping, a moon pool over a grave, Clementine's descent, the lift, and the snap that turns victory into fragments. 4. The fallout. Suspicion in Moscow, leak hunting in Washington, and a phrase born from panic we can neither confirm nor deny. A burial tape crosses an ocean years later. 5. The legacy. Techniques that leapt forward, doctrines that hardened, and families left with a salute in place of answers. Along the way, we'll open the files we can, name what's still withheld, and follow the moments where people made calls they couldn't take back. Vanishing Act. K-129 goes silent. The ocean doesn't announce a missing heartbeat. It just goes quiet. February 1968, Rybachi on Kamchatka is still winter cold when K-129, hull 722, clears the bay for a ballistic missile patrol. Diesel-electric, Gulf II class, 3 SSN-5s in their deck tubes, Captain First Rank Vladimir Kobzar in command. The route is routine, the stakes are not. In a world of hair-trigger launch orders, a boat like this is a moving piece of nuclear policy. Aboard, 98 men whose families expect letters, not silence. The rules are simple: radio checks on schedule, encrypted burst transmissions, then back to silence. On March 8, around midnight near the 180th meridian, the check-in doesn't come. 1 miss can be weather. 2 is a knot in the stomach. 3 is a problem no one says out loud. A strategic asset off the grid with nuclear weapons aboard. Inside Soviet Pacific Fleet headquarters, phones go hot. Patrol aircraft spool up from Yelizovo. Trawlers get new instructions. Surface ships and submarines flood the patrol box, periscopes up, listening for a sound that isn't there. They don't have a deep ocean ear. Their sonar is for contact, not catastrophe. If K-129 is already on the bottom, the search pattern is a ritual, not a solution. Meanwhile, something else is happening far away. Across the Pacific, the United States has laid a secret web, SOSUS. The undersea microphones bolted to continental slopes and island chains, feeding low-frequency whispers to shore stations. Analysts who live on spectrograms see a violent acoustic event, a sharp, compact signature that doesn't match a surface collision or a routine implosion. They cross-correlate arrivals across multiple arrays, correct for thermoclines using historical sound speed profiles, and solve a hyperbolic fix, intersecting time difference of arrival curves that narrow to a patch roughly 5 nautical miles across. It's far out in blue water, roughly 1,560 miles northwest of Rahu. The timing lines up with the missed check. They don't know it's K129 yet. They know something big ended fast. In a Puget Sound lab, an analyst taps a pencil and whispers, "If it's a hull, 98 souls." No one answers. To understand why this matters, think about what's on board. Not just men and missiles, but guidance electronics, gyro packages, cryptographic gear, the bones of Soviet metallurgy. A dead submarine is a map of the living fleet. Find it first, you get to read. The Soviets widen the search, burning fuel and hope. The Americans do math. Triangulation from multiple hydrophones gives a patch of ocean the size of a small country. That's not enough. So a different tool moves onto the board. USS Halibut, the oddball sub the Navy turned into a spy platform, rigged with cameras that can stare into black water for hours. Her job is to cruise a grid in secret and photograph the sea floor 3 miles down. In Washington, they pair SOSUS fixes with Halibut's short baseline acoustic navigation, drop acoustic transponders, range them, and solve for precise offsets, so the photo mosaics can be stitched to coordinates with yard-scale confidence. 3 days earlier, in offices with no windows, briefers tell a handful of people what nobody outside will hear for years. "We think we can find it. The risk is detection yet. It's weather, depth, and time. Currents in the mid-Pacific don't care about grief or geopolitics. A debris field spreads. If they wait, sand and silt will bury the story." Back on Kamchatka, families hear the emptiest sentence in military language. Missing. No details, no wreckage, no memorial. At sea, Soviet ships rendezvous, signal flags in cold wind, and then split again, the kind of coordinated motion that gives the illusion of control. Pilots stare down at endless slate and whitecap. The Pacific stares back. What nobody on those decks knows is that in a Puget Sound lab and a few East Coast rooms, analysts are printing sonograms, marking time slices with grease pencil, arguing over phase delay. One detail will matter later. The acoustic spike is sudden, as if something structural failed catastrophically. That's not proof. It's a clue you can't unsee. Halibut's first passes don't find anything. The ocean is too big, the grid too coarse. She comes back with photos of manganese nodules, abyssal plains, small scars in the sediment, nothing that looks like a 328-foot hull. The team shrinks the box. They rerun the SOSUS model with new assumptions about propagation through temperature layers. The patch gets smaller. The weather window gets worse. Then a micro story. A shore analyst, coffee gone cold, notices a secondary echo on a distant array, a faint tail that could be a bounce off the sea floor. It nudges the estimated range just enough to redraw the search lanes. It's not a eureka moment, it's a shove. Weeks later, Halibut's cameras catch geometry that isn't natural. A cylinder ruptured, lying canted on the bottom, twisted deck plating, debris scattered like a breadcrumb trail. No flags, no numbers readable yet, but the configuration matches a Gulf II. The boat didn't disintegrate. Large sections are intact. That matters. It means equipment could have survived pressure, water ingress, and impact. The Soviets never see these photos. Their search winds down with nothing to show but fuel logs and unanswered questions. American briefers lock theirs in safe drawers and start a whisper chain. This may be K129. The United States won't announce it. They'll compartmentalize. The list of people who know will stay short and hard. Stakes tighten. If they can identify hull features, missile tube placement, the sail's damage pattern, they can be confident enough to propose the unthinkable. But before ambition, a decision. Do they leave a grave undisturbed or treat it like a target? In the Cold War, that's not a philosophical question. It's an operational one. The coordinates turn from estimates to numbers with decimal places. A classified prize sits under 16,500 feet of water. Finding is one thing. Lifting is madness, unless you can lie well enough to work in daylight. While that debate begins, the ocean closes back over the spot, and the only trace that something happened is a line in an American log and a silence in a Soviet kitchen. The Vanishing becomes a secret address. Now the question moves from where is it to how do you touch it without being seen? Finding the Unfindable, how the US located K-129. They had a patch of ocean and a rumor of violence. Now they needed proof without telling the Soviets they were looking. That meant doing everything loud enough to work, quiet enough to vanish. First, the sound. SOSUS analysts broke the acoustic spike into fingerprints, rise time, decay, frequency content, then mapped likely origin ellipses across the mid-Pacific. Temperature layers bend sound like glass bends light, so they rebuilt the ocean in math. Thermoclines, seasonal shifts, bottom topography. Each tweak moved the crosshairs by miles. Meanwhile, they pulled satellite ephemerides, not to see the wreck, but to predict when the Soviets might overfly their own search lanes. If American ships showed up under a Soviet pass, the game was over. Next, the eyes. USS Halibut got the nod to return, but this time with a tighter grid and a new set of orders. Confirm identity, keep your wake invisible. She towed camera sleds that crept a few meters above the seafloor, strobe lights firing in cold intervals, overlapping frames like a quilt. The photographs went to windowless rooms where technicians flipped through stacks looking for lines that nature doesn't draw. Hatches, hinges, circular manways, the hard shadow of a sail. Unknown to them, across town, another team worked a legal puzzle. If they found it in international waters, there was no grave protection statute to hide behind. Morally complicated, legally permissive. That mattered to the people who'd have to sign a billion-dollar check. What nobody knew at the time was how much the currents had smeared the field. Impact throws parts. Slow drifts carry them. The first catalog looked like a scrapyard. Cable spools, torn plating, an unrecognizable segment with ribs showing. Then something else. 3 cylindrical shadows in a line, not intact, but in positions that fit a Gulf II's deck missile tubes. A hatch ring, sheared, lay half buried. That was the moment everything changed. If those tubes were what they thought, the rest of the hull was close. While that was happening in Washington, a quiet Navy survey ship ran a manganese pattern far from prying eyes, shooting side-scan sonar to paint the bottom in grayscale. The returns showed a long, high-contrast shape broken in two, with debris radiating like spokes. The dimensions weren't precise, but they were close. Hull diameter in the right neighborhood, length of the larger piece, roughly 100+ feet, the smaller section trailing. Stakes sharpened. Identifying it as K-129 wasn't just about numbers, it was about confidence. They compared weld patterns, the spacing of free flood holes, even the angle of the sail's leading edge from Soviet manuals and old photos. One detail would prove crucial later, a fracture line aft of the sail that suggested structural weakness. It wasn't conclusive, it was persuasive. But there was one problem. The depth, 16,500 feet, put the wreck beyond any known salvage capability. Pressure down there crushes sloppy assumptions. Sediment hides small prizes fast. If crypto gear had blown out of compartments, it might be scattered in sand dunes. If it stayed inside, they'd need to lift steel to get it. The legal gray zone became an engineering abyss. 3 days earlier, the briefers had told the director what the prize list could include: missile guidance gyros, vacuum tube logic chains, torpedo components, code machines, even nuclear warhead housings that could reveal fusing and safety design. Each item was a window into doctrine. Each item was also a diplomatic grenade if exposed. Unknown to the Halibut crew, planners were already sketching a surface ship that could work in plain sight. But before a claw, they needed a lock on coordinates. So Halibut ran one more pass, this time with a short baseline acoustic nav system referenced to transponders dropped around the site. The position errors shrank from miles to yards. Micro story, A photo interpreter, eyes red from the light table, traced a shadow he dismissed as a rock. On the second pass, he noticed regularity, equidistant cuts like ladder rungs, a hatch combing. He wrote probable golf class forward section, underlined twice. In the aftermath, the map that mattered fit on a single sheet. A center point, two main fragments marked FWD and aft, scatter plots of debris, depth contours, current vectors. Confidence high enough to brief the White House. The question slid from "is it there?" to "can we take it?" To do that, they'd have to invent a new industry and a fake reason to be exactly here. And they'd have to keep the Soviets curious, but not suspicious, long enough to lower a machine into the dark and close its hands. Building the lie, the Hughes cover story. They couldn't sail a spy ship to the middle of the Pacific and park over a Soviet grave. They needed a story so large it explained the impossible. In Langley, the answer arrived with a single name: Howard Hughes, reclusive billionaire, aviation legend, a man whose projects were so strange they made their own weather. If anyone could build a monster vessel to mine the ocean, it was Hughes. Or at least, that's what the paperwork would say. The real builders, Global Marine Inc., with chief engineer Curtis Crook and naval architect John Graham translating an absurd brief into steel and systems. Get this, the pitch was we're stealing a sub. It was a moonshot for minerals, manganese nodules, potato-sized rocks littering abyssal plains, rich in nickel, cobalt, copper. Global Marine had already chased deep ocean drilling. The CIA could piggyback on that credibility. The cover would claim that Hughes's companies were launching the next industrial revolution, vacuuming nodules off the seafloor with a custom-built ship, processing them on board, proving a future worth billions. Real science. Real prospectors, real contracts, a lie hidden inside plausibility. Make it breathe, they built a forest of front companies. Summer's corporate maze wrapped around new shells that could sign checks, buy steel, hire shipyard space, and never lead back to Langley. Lawyers drafted leases for a Hughes Glomar Explorer, a name that sounded like a marketing team's dream. Press releases hinted at breakthroughs just over the horizon. Trade publications got whispers about deep-water positioning, drilling risers adapted for mining slurries, a moon pool for handling equipment. No one outside the circle knew that the pool was sized to swallow a submarine's forward section. Sun Shipbuilding in Chester, Pennsylvania cut the plates. Global Marine's team under Crook and Graham insisted on dynamic positioning and heave compensation that looked like mining overkill, because it wasn't for mining. Meanwhile, the White House needed deniability with receipts. A handful of members of Congress got the thinnest possible brief. Sensitive ocean research with national security implications, Howard Hughes as the commercial face, budget lines tucked into black programs. They weren't told about codebooks or bodies. They heard technology edge, resource competition, strategic metals. It was just enough to keep the money moving and the questions soft. Now remember, this is the early 70s. Environmental fights are heating up, corporate ambition looks heroic, and Hughes is a ghost who never gives interviews. Perfect cover. If a ship the size of a small city shows up claiming to mine nodules, skeptics can grumble about profit and pollution while missing the point. The CIA wanted noise, commercial noise, that would drown out curiosity. There was one problem. Keeping secrets in America means dealing with the press. Reporters started to poke at procurement oddities, strange contracts, silence around a shipyard project too big to hide. When a journalist asked the agency for comment, lawyers coined a phrase that would outlive the operation. We can neither confirm nor deny. The Glomar Response wasn't born in a seminar. It was a reflex to protect a lie. It told the world nothing and everything at once. In Chester, Pennsylvania, Sun Shipbuilding cut steel under a blizzard of NDAs. Workers thought they were building a mining vessel with a derrick and miles of pipe to reach the deep. That was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. The heart of the deception was the mission profile. Lower a string of pipe, section by section, into the abyss. That matches mining. It also matches lowering a claw. The design brief insisted on dynamic positioning thrusters to hold station over a pinprick in a hostile sea. Mining needs that, so does theft. Microstory. An engineer reviewing drafts keeps circling the moon pool dimensions. It's huge, recklessly huge for ore handling. He asks why. He's told scale is essential for future payload growth. He signs off, uneasy but dazzled by the ambition. Years later, he'll learn the payload was a coffin-shaped Soviet hull. John Graham would joke, softly, that they were designing a man-made island with a secret basement. Across town, CIA logistics officers shop the world for specialized gear, heave compensation systems, precision navigation, pipe handling cranes, while accountants laundered invoices through plausible mining categories. A separate effort birthed the Hughes mining barge, HMB-1, a submersible workshop that could build and transfer classified machinery out of sight. Explain that to a dock worker, and it sounds like modular mining kit. In truth, it was the cocoon for a mechanical hand. What nobody knew at the time outside a sealed room was how thin the margin for the cover really was. The Soviets read American newspapers. Howard Hughes to mine the deep looked like eccentric capitalism to some and a mask to others. So the CIA salted the world with supporting detail, academic partnerships on polymetallic nodules, conference appearances by consultants, models of nodules passed around to visitors. Anything to make the story heavy enough to stand on its own. Meanwhile, the people who had to sail the ship needed compartmentalized truths. Crews were told they were pioneers, hush-hush because of competitive advantage, not espionage. They drilled on station keeping, pipe makeup, and safety around a center well that could swallow a locomotive. A few key hands learned an extra layer, handling a capture vehicle, never called by its nickname on paper. Clementine was a mining tool, they said, designed to scoop and cradle ore. The word submarine never appeared. Then came the leak scare. A California paper sniffed at unusual activity around the barge and the ship, odd procurement trails, and Hughes's involvement. Calls went out. The agency tried something new, refused to acknowledge the premise. We can neither confirm nor deny, migrated from a letter to a posture. It worked well enough to buy time. The cover didn't need to be bulletproof. It needed to last one season at sea. In the aftermath of those close calls, one thing became clear. The cover story didn't just protect an operation, it reshaped how the government spoke about secrets. The mining myth was a shield. It was also a prototype for modern denial. And under that shield, steel kept rising, contracts kept clearing, and a ship that wasn't a ship took shape to do a job no one could admit existed. The Claw, engineering the impossible. 16,500 feet of water doesn't just weigh on steel, it weighs on certainty. The teams had a target and a cover. Now they needed a hand big enough to hold a broken submarine and gentle enough not to crush it on contact. The ask sounded simple in a meeting room. Down on drawings, it turned into a list of problems with teeth. Curtis Crook pushed for ruthless simplicity in the lift path. John Graham worried the hull would sing itself apart around a center well that could swallow a locomotive. Start with the lift path. Mining riser technology said you could lower pipe in sections, thread them together, and transmit force cleanly. But ore slurries don't fight back. A submarine section does. The solution was to adapt a drilling riser into a spine, thousands of feet of steel pipe sections, each with precision connectors, controlled by a derrick that could add or remove doubles while compensating for the ship's heave. Every wave on the surface translates into stress in the string. If you don't cancel that motion, the pipe snaps like chalk. So they built a heave compensation system the size of a house. Hydraulic accumulators, massive cylinders, and control valves that read the ocean's pulse and moved in opposition, shaving the up and down into tolerable inches. It wasn't elegant. It was brutal, industrial ballet. Meanwhile, dynamic positioning had to hold the ship over a point the size of a tennis court. Thrusters fought wind, current, and swell, guided by a network of gyros and reference beacons. Drift a few yards at the wrong moment, and the pipe would side-load. Side loads kill lifts. Then came the business end. The capture vehicle, never claw on a blueprint, needed to reach around a 20-foot diameter hull, bite into compromised steel, and distribute load across ribs that might already be cracked. You can't drill holes at the bottom of the Pacific. You can only clasp. Engineers broke it into tines. High-strength steel fingers hinged to a central strongback beam. Each tine had a pad, a geometry tuned to grab structure, not skin. Too sharp and you shear plating. Too blunt, and you slip. Here's where it gets tricky. Nobody knew the material condition of K-129's forward section. Saltwater intrusion, embrittlement, impact fractures invisible in the murk. Metallurgists sketched worst cases: stress corrosion cracking, notch sensitivity under dynamic load. The only hedge was redundancy: more tines, more contact points, load sharing that let one finger fail without cascading the whole system. They added sensors in the tines to read force, so operators topside could shift load on the fly and avoid spikes. In late-night reviews, Graham ran a finger over photos of a known fracture aft of the sail and said, "If this propagates under lift, it won't shout, it'll sigh." Micro story: in a lab at Lockheed, a test article of a claw tine crushed a section of sacrificial hull plating. The gauge needles jumped. The sample failed at a lower load than predicted. A quiet curse. Someone adjusted the pad radius and the weld fillet. The next test held longer. Not long enough to be comfortable. Long enough to argue they could build margin everywhere else. In the control room simulations, a young operator practiced whispering callouts to steady his hands. Green, green, yellow. So he wouldn't freeze when steel started talking back. Weight haunted every calculation. The capture vehicle had to be heavy enough to descend straight and true in black water, but light enough that the riser could lift it plus the submarine section without exceeding yield at the weakest joint. Every pound on board the ship mattered. They tapered pipe wall thickness along the string, thick near the top, thinner near the bottom where tension was lower. That taper saved tons. Tons meant room for error where error liked to hide. Alignment was the nightmare the drawings couldn't soothe. At 3 miles down, there's no pilot window, no diver to wave you in. Guidance comes from sonar pings and cameras that see only what their lights touch. The plan: lower Clementine in stages, pause to calibrate, use transponder beacons around the wreck to triangulate position, and inch the tines over the hull like a blind person learning a face by touch. They built a control room around that idea. Operators watching grainy images, reading numbers, making tiny moves that added up to a grip. What nobody outside the sealed circle realized was how much they were betting on a single-point failure not occurring. One crack in a riser joint, one weld with a hidden porosity defect, one valve lag in the heave system. Any of those could cascade into a shock load that ripped the sub free mid-lift. The engineers built inspection into the operation, non-destructive tests on pipe joints, serial numbers tracked like birth certificates, torque specs double-checked and initialed. The culture was simple: assume nothing, verify everything. Meanwhile, the moon pool turned from a drawing to a cathedral. Its doors had to seal under load, so that when the subsection rose into the center well, they could close off the ocean and work in dry air, unseen. The opening was so large that the ship's structural continuity ran narrow along the sides. Naval architects added deep girders and stiffeners until the hull stopped complaining under finite element models. Still, the chief engineer would wake up at night thinking about a rogue swell, a rolled gasket, a resonance you only hear once. Here's where the mining cover helped the math. Deep-sea nodules were a plausible excuse for extraordinarily precise station-keeping and a moon pool big enough to swallow secrets. But human factors didn't care about cover stories. They trained crews on pipe handling choreography: clamp, hoist, spin, stab, torque, release. Again, again, again. So when the real lift came, hands moved without hunting for tools. While that was happening in California, a separate team worked contingency gear. Cutters that could sever the string in an emergency without sending the whole load into a pendulum, dead man valves that locked under power loss. A jettison plan that would keep Clementine from turning into a bomb on the way down. The worst day was always baked into the design. In the aftermath of 1,000 decisions, the system became a stack of tolerances and faith. The ship could hold still enough. The heave comp could breathe against the sea. The pipe could carry the weight. The claw could embrace without breaking. It wasn't certainty. It was a bet placed with equations, welds, and sleeplessness. Then the day came to stop modeling and start sailing. Sailing into the trap, deployment and deception. They sailed like prospectors, not thieves. Summer 1974, The Hughes Glomar Explorer slips from California water with crew lists that look civilian, manifests that read mining equipment, and a mission brief that never says the word submarine. The derrick gleams. The decks smell of cutting oil and fresh paint. The cover has to arrive before the ship does. A welder-turned deck boss pockets a letter from home and tells a young hand, "We don't ask what's under us. We just keep the steel honest." Unknown to most on board, Navy surveillance aircraft and distant subs mark a loose perimeter, eyes off but ready. The plan needs daylight to look legitimate and darkness to do the work. So the rhythms are set. Mock surveys in the morning, pipe drills in the afternoon, classified checks at night when the ocean swallows sound. While that's happening in the North Pacific, Soviet trawlers loiter in patterns that aren't about fish. They've read the papers too. Hughes plus a monster ship equals curiosity with teeth. A grey hull appears on a far horizon, then vanishes in fog. The message is clear. You're being watched by people who don't wave. Station keeping over the site is the first test of the lie. Dynamic positioning thrusters hum beneath the waterline, correcting drift by feet, not yards. On deck, the crew sells the illusion by staging nodule trials, deploying dummy gear, streaming cable, logging useless samples of seawater into clipboards. Cameras click for company newsletters that will never print. Compartmentalization is a second skin. Crew rotations split the ship into circles of knowledge. One group knows pipe. Another knows the moon pool doors. A tiny inner ring knows Clementine's real purpose. Everyone else hears a cleaner story. You're pioneers, your work is competitive sensitive. Keep your mouths shut. It works because it's partly true. 3 days earlier, a Soviet auxiliary steamed through the area and left behind a drift of rumors. Now, a new contact edges closer, broadcasting fishing vessel call signs on a radio that's too tidy. Binoculars come out. A helicopter deck crew quietly stacks crates where landing skids might touch. Across the bridge, a red folder sits under a hand. Emergency destruction orders if an armed boarding is attempted. Nobody says it, but the edge sharpens. To break the pattern, they play the mining script to the hilt. A small launch drops a buoy for current studies. A crane lowers a mock collector head and brings it back dripping. The log notes manganese. The ledger notes nothing about transponder calibrations planted near a wreck 3 miles down. The deception isn't theatrical. It's mundane, which is better. People ignore boring. Weather matters more than watchers. Swell rolls in at angles that make the derrick moan. The heave comp system breathes with the ocean, cylinders hissing to keep the centerline steady. Every time the ship shudders, a man in the control room glances at an accelerometer and does the math again. Too much motion at the wrong frequency, and the pipe will sing itself to death. Unknown to them, across town on Oahu, an American operations cell updates a board with Soviet positions, weather windows, and orbital tracks. Satellite overpasses tell them when curious eyes in space might glance their way. The goal is simple. Drop Clementine when no one's directly overhead. It isn't invisibility, it's timing. Micro story. A night watch on the fantail hears a dull thump against the hull and shines a light, just driftwood. He laughs, then glances over his shoulder at the black water and doesn't laugh again. Out here, every unfamiliar sound reads like a message. Another crewman keeps a tally on a scrap of tape near a gauge, each flawless pipe stab a hash mark, a private spell against the one that goes wrong. Crew culture tightens into ritual. Pipe crews practice makeup in silence, except for hand signals and talk counts. The moon pool team walks their routes with flashlights, memorizing steps, hinges, and handholds. A small cadre meets in a soundproofed room and rehearses the descent sequence in whispers. A printed checklist grows dog ears and coffee stains. They're not superhuman. They're rehearsal machines. Meanwhile, Soviet presence ebbs and surges. A trawler sits off the starboard quarter for hours, nets still, antenna farm bristling. The bridge logs it as fishing activity. The engineering log notes nothing, which says enough. A captain's call goes out. No signaling, no photography, no unnecessary lights after dusk. The ship shrinks its signature. While that was happening at sea, a parallel deception ran in Washington. Trade journals publish a syndicated piece on Hughes's pioneering nodule plan. A science writer praises the potential boon to strategic metals. The CIA doesn't plant the piece directly. It just makes sure sources are reachable and enthusiastic. The story has a life of its own by design. Then the window opens. Weather forecasts show a stretch of manageable seas. Soviet dots on the chart slide away, distracted by something else or bored by the show. Orders settle like dust, begin descent. On deck, voices drop. The derrick hoists the first double, stabs it, torques it, and releases. The cycle starts. Add, test. Add each section, lowering Clementine by increments into water that turns from cobalt to ink. A Soviet helicopter appears as a speck and arcs wide. On the flight deck, those crates are still stacked, a quiet dare. The helo circles once and peels off. The deception holds because the work looks like work. In the aftermath of that pass, the Explorer becomes a metronome. Every few minutes, another joint goes down the hole. The moon pool doors yaw beneath them, the ocean thundering past like wind in a canyon. Below, the capture vehicle falls through shadow toward a grave they'll disturb while pretending to harvest rocks. Above, a lie floats so well it almost feels true. Contact with the dead, descent and capture. The first 100 feet feel easy. Steel remembers buoyancy. Gravity hasn't made its final argument yet. In the control room, voices are low, clipped. Depth, tension, heave comp stroke, differential. Each double of pipe disappears through the moon pool with the same rhythm. Clamp, hoist, stab, torque. Below, Clementine falls through a column of dark so long it becomes a place. A junior tech keeps his palm on the console edge to feel vibration changes before the gauges show them. His way of hearing the machine breathe. Stakes sharpen with depth. 3 miles down, pressure turns mistakes into confetti. Inside those numbers, real stakes ride the string. Warheads that may or may not be intact, code systems that might still be locked behind corroded doors, and the remains of men who left port in winter and never saw spring. The operators don't say it, but they feel it. A ship of Americans is reaching for Soviet dead. Halfway down, the water temperature drops across the thermocline. Sensors show it like a cliff. Currents shift. The string hums a different note. Heave comp breathes harder, cylinders eating swell to keep the top of the riser quiet, while the bottom drifts into a slow, predictable arc. The navigation tech calls out ranges to the acoustic beacons planted around the wreck site. Triangulation holds. Tiny corrections with thrusters nudge the ship back over the point. What nobody in that room needs reminding of is the alignment nightmare waiting at the bottom. The claw can't search. It has to arrive where the sub is. Cameras kick on for the first preview, cones of light in particulate snow. The sea returns a close-up of nothing, plankton, glittering silt, then a grey smear that might be seafloor. They lower another few hundred feet. The smear sharpens into ripples, abyssal sand. Mark bottom proximity, the chief says, and the descent slows to a crawl. They sweep the forward-looking sonar. A low, long shape emerges at the edge of the display, a suggestion more than a silhouette. The pilot trims pitch and yaw with thumb movements small enough to hide in a heartbeat. Time stretches. Then geometry arrives, a curve too true for geology. The camera light grazes it and draws a line, plating, scarred and silted at an angle. The interpreter leans forward. Hull! No one cheers. The word lands like a weight. Stakes press in. One misalignment here and a tine catches a seam, tears, slips, or crumples steel that barely remembers being whole. The plan says go for the forward section, cradle under strong frames, avoid the fracture aft of the sail that looked ready to propagate. The pilot inches Clementine sideways, reading force sensors on each tine as if they're pulses. Action concentrates to fingertips and breathing. Open tines 2 through 7, the lead engineer says. Hydraulics answer with a steady whine. Pads angle like hands preparing to lift a sleeping child. Silt billows, a slow-motion storm that erases vision. The pilot pauses, waits for the cloud to settle, then eases in again. The strongback shadows the hull like a low crescent moon. Human beat. In the quiet, someone whispers the number, 98. It isn't a prayer. It's an agreement not to forget what's inside. A deckhand who spent weeks turning wrenches closes his eyes for a second and sees a kitchen table in Petropavlovsk, a chair that stayed empty. Another writes the number 98 on the top line of his notebook and boxes it like a vow. Contact, the sensor tech says. One tine registers load, then another. Tiny adjustments redistribute weight as the pads find ribs under plating. Numbers climb, measured, fragile. Close 1 degree increments, the lead says. The claw tightens by fractions of a breath. No scraping, no spike, just weight becoming shared. This is the moment everything can go wrong. The ship must act like stone. Heave comp strokes in counterpoint to the swell. The thrusters purr to cancel drift. The pilot watches the force bars, green, yellow, nothing red. Hold, the chief says. They hold long enough to listen for trouble. None comes. Action turns to lift. Take on load, the derrick operator says, and the riser string settles into tension. The numbers creep up as steel remembers the job. The hull does not tear. The claw does not slip. A long, low groan runs up the pipe that everyone feels in their teeth. The ship answers with a chorus of its own, girders talking, bolts complaining, compensators hissing. Outside, the Pacific keeps its face. Impact immediate and quiet. The first inches matter more than the first 100 feet. Breaking suction between wreck and seafloor takes finesse. The pilot angles a degree, the strongback levers gently, and the forward section parts from sand that's held it for 6 years. A rush of silk blooms. The cameras go blind again. No one cares. The load cell says it's moving. What nobody knew at the time was how close the margins were. A pressure pulse from a passing swell nudges the string. The heave comp catches it, late by a blink and then perfect. A spike kisses yellow on a gauge and slides back. The operator doesn't breathe for 3 counts and then does. Meanwhile, topside, the bridge logs a distant contact veering off. The helicopter deck is still booby-trapped with stacked crates. The show above remains mining. Below, theft proceeds by millimeters. Human beat unplanned. The chief engineer, not religious by habit, rubs a thumb across a grease stain on his clipboard like a talisman. In the control room, the youngest tech whispers, "Hold," to the numbers as if they can hear him. The claws close that final hair. The load consolidates. The ship creaks, then holds. For a handful of seconds, there's no math, only a feeling. Hands around history, around secrets, around bones. They've got it. Begin ascent, the chief says. If they can bring it up, the secrets come with it, or fall away on the way to light. The break, catastrophe in slow motion. Half a mile off the bottom, the numbers look steady. Tension holds within the safe band, heave comp strokes in rhythm, the ship pinned over the spot like it's nailed to the sea. In the control room, someone finally sips coffee gone lukewarm. Then the riser hum shifts. It's subtle at first, a higher note, a tremor that doesn't belong to weather. Eyes flick to the weld maps and the fracture diagram Graham kept on a clipboard. Everyone knows the margins. One hidden inclusion in a weld toe, one pressure pulse a fraction late, 1 degree of yaw at the wrong second. Stakes spike instantly. Months of planning are balanced on brittle steel and bolts that never met this exact combination of load, motion, and time. If a joint starts to work, if a tine slips even a fraction, the subsection could fall. What's in that steel isn't just metal. It's bodies, fragments of guidance gear, a chance to look inside another nuclear doctrine. Lose it, and all of that goes back to silence. Action measured in heartbeats. An acoustic alarm whispers, then barks. The heave compensator stroke hits its in stop and reverses. The operator throws a hair more damping into the loop. The derrick operator eases the winch, shaving a few £100 of tension. The pilot reads the tine sensors, no red, but 2 bars run high, suggesting load shifted forward. Trim 2 degrees aft, the chief says. The strongback answers. The hum drops a note, not enough. In a corner, a crewman blows air slowly through his teeth, counting to 4, trying to exhale, his hands steady. Unknown to them, across 40 feet of pipe wall, a fatigue crack that started as a dark thought inside a weld toe begins to grow. Low cycle load, tiny salt crystals, 1,000 microyields. They've been whispering to it since the first joint stabbed into the derrick. Now, with weight consolidated in the claw, A surge runs up the string. The crack lengthens like a zip. 300 feet higher, a connector squeals, a sound no one hears except through the instruments. The load cell jumps, drops, then climbs again. That stutter is the ship and the sea arguing through steel. The control room goes quiet enough to hear hydraulics breathe. Hold your inputs, the chief says. No chasing ghosts. They've trained not to overcorrect. Overcorrection kills lifts. Human beat. The deck boss, a welder by trade, stares at a gauge, jaw set, whispering a steady beat. 1, 2, 3, as if cadence can keep metal honest. The youngest tech's lips move around the word stay. In another room, a sailor who lost a brother on a different boat grips the edge of a console until his knuckles go white. Then the shudder, not a lurch, worse. A long, rippling flex that runs the riser like a bowstring. Everyone feels it in their bones. Spike, the sensor tech barks, and 3 bars kiss yellow, 1 slaps red and comes back. Heave comp, add 5%, the chief calls. The cylinders dig in. For 10 seconds it holds. The riser's hum climbs toward a thin screen. The load cell graph stutters, drops, grabs, climbs, the ship and the sea arguing through steel. What nobody knew at the time was how the fracture line in the sub's forward section, mapped months earlier from photographs, would become a script. Stress found it again. Inside the claw, where tines gripped ribs, load shared as they designed. But aft, where plating and frame had been scarred by impact 6 years before, the steel didn't have another chapter to give. Action slow motion. A tine force creeps beyond the planned share. The pilot feathers pressure to bleed it off. The strongback tilts a degree. The ship yawns into a trough. Heave comp reacts, a breath late. A second stutter climbs the pipe, smaller and meaner. Something down there answers with a groan that isn't the ship. It's older. It's the sub. Stakes final. If the section shears, the heavier part will fall clean. The claw might keep a fragment, bones, debris, maybe a console or two. The codes they dreamt about could still be inside or scattered forever. There's no pause button. Gravity has the floor. The brake isn't a back, it's surrender. In the control room, the load curve on the main display drops in a smooth arc, then rebounds as the claw catches what remains. We've lost mass, the derrick operator says, voice flat. He doesn't need numbers to know. Everyone hears the sudden silence in the riser, a missing bass note. Somewhere below, 2/3 of K-129's forward section lets go and slides back through black water, disappearing into the silt it just left. A young tech whispers, 98, under his breath, and keeps his eyes on the green bars like it's the only thing he can control. Impact immediate, alarms quiet to a steady tone. The tine sensors settle in a new pattern, lower total, different distribution. Stabilize, the chief says, and the commands come like a rosary, trim, damp, hold. The pilot keeps the strongback cradled around what's left. No one looks at one another for a long 5 seconds. Human beat, a quiet curse, then nothing. An engineer drops his eyes to the floor and stares at a scuff mark like it can answer him. Someone else closes a logbook without writing the line. On the bridge, the captain's hand sits on the red folder again. It's reflex. Even failure needs protection. Meanwhile, on the Soviet trawler that's been sniffing around for days, a man with binoculars sees nothing different. The deception still holds because the catastrophe is invisible. Above decks, the routine continues. Pipe comes up, pipe goes down, meters of work. Below, a different ledger just turned. The decision point hits fast. Abort and set the fragment down, or keep lifting and bring up whatever the claw still cradles. The chief runs the numbers, remaining tension within limits, heave comp not maxed, dynamic positioning holding. Continue ascent, he says. It's not bravado, it's calculus. As the riser climbs, the ship creaks in a lower register, relieved of a weight it meant to carry and haunted by a weight it lost. The control room fills with the sound of instruments doing their jobs and men not talking about the thing they can't fix. Months of planning met a 6-year-old fracture line and lost. In the aftermath that nobody's allowed to have yet, the narrative fractures too. The mission won't be success or failure. It'll be a sliver that still speaks and an absence that won't. For now, the orders are simple. Bring up what you've got. Keep the lie breathing. And don't say out loud that the ocean just kept most of the secret it promised. What came up? Prizes, secrets, and the funeral. They eased the fragment into the moon pool like a secret returning to air. Doors shut, pumps roared. The center well bled seawater until steel hung dripping in a cavern 7 stories tall. Not triumph, not yet, just a piece of a lost boat suspended in a manufactured silence. Stakes moved from ocean to metal. Was there anything worth the risk? The forward section they'd kept was shorter, torn open along frames. Inside lay layers of silt, cables ripped to ribs, and the unmistakable, careful shapes of machinery built by another doctrine. And there were men, Soviet sailors who'd ridden that hull to the bottom and back into American hands. The room changed when that truth stepped in. Action began with gloves, masks, and measured steps. A small recovery team climbed scaffolds around the section, lights angled to cut glare, Geiger counters ticking a low reassurance. They weren't treasure hunters. They were technicians cataloging a wreck that still carried dignity. Torpedo components emerged first, portions of guidance assemblies, and exploder mechanisms from conventional weapons. Metallurgists perked up. Alloy analysis of casings, heat treatment signatures, machining marks. All data the labs would turn into reports about Soviet industrial practice and tolerances. Then the small things that spark arguments decades later. A ruggedized electronics box with Cyrillic stenciling, its seals compromised, but its guts intact. A set of relays and vacuum tubes arranged in a way that suggested fire control logic. Fragments of an encryption device familiar in principle, if not model. Some inside the program would later insist there was crypto value in that haul. Rotors, manuals, something that told stories about Soviet message discipline. Others would argue the real codebooks, if ever present, were in the lost portion. The truth stayed in memoranda with thick black lines. Meanwhile, they pulled samples like surgeons. Hull plate coupons to read grain and weld quality, fasteners bagged and labeled, wire looms cut for insulation analysis. The prize list shrank from fantasy to forensics. There was no intact ballistic missile guidance set. If it had existed where they gripped, it had either torn away or sat in the steel now back on the seafloor. There were no nuclear warheads in the piece they'd lifted. That too became an argument. Were the warheads after the fracture? Did they jettison, or did the impact destroy their housings? The team on deck wrote what they could prove and kept speculation off paper. Human beat, unavoidable, the remains. They found them in compartments that had become silted tombs, bones in uniforms, personal effects trapped in folds, a watch face still legible under grime. The Americans paused the catalogue. The chief engineer, still greasy from a night that wouldn't end, took off his cap. The mission brief didn't tell them how to feel. They decided anyway. Action turned ceremonial. The agency and Navy improvised a burial at sea. On deck, sailors and civilians stood shoulder to shoulder while the Pacific rolled indifferent. A flag, Soviet, borrowed and ironed, was laid over a makeshift bier. A chaplain spoke words that didn't belong to either ideology. Honor the dead, return them to the sea, let families have whatever peace this could bring. Taps wouldn't be played. Instead, there was a moment of pure quiet. Then the stretchers tipped, and the ocean took them back. They filmed it. A camera on a tripod, a date burned into the corner, faces held in the disciplined stillness of people doing something that matters and must stay hidden. That tape would sit in a cabinet because the whole operation couldn't afford its humanity. Years later, when the story leaked and tempers cooled just enough, the United States would hand a copy to Russia. It landed like an apology that couldn't say its own name. Impact came in 2 speeds. Immediately, labs lit up. Metallurgy reports fed into assessments of Soviet safety margins. Torpedo bits told engineers about fusing logic and shock resilience. The electronics, vacuum tubes, relay logic, shielding choices, mapped a technological culture that chose rugged simplicity where the US had gone solid state. For planners, even those small windows mattered. They calibrated assumptions about reliability, maintenance cycles, and how Soviet systems might perform under stress. Ripple effects spread quietly. SOSUS analysts got validation that their acoustic read had pointed to the right grave. Recovery specialists advanced a playbook for deep ocean handling that would echo in later, quieter missions. Inside the CIA, a debate hardened. Had they risked an international crisis for scraps, or had they proven a capacity that changed what was possible underwater? Both could be true. Complication lingered in every debrief. What didn't they get? The intact crypto suite, the definitive read on missile guidance, the warheads. The break controlled the answers. Some argued for a second mission to go back. Plans sketched, schedules tentatively inked, but the cover was fraying. Reporters were sniffing. Moscow was watching more closely. The window that had opened for one audacious lift was closing with a click you could feel. In the aftermath, the ship turned toward home under the same lie that brought her out. The logbook said mining trials. The men on board carried a different ledger, pieces of a rival's machines bagged and tagged, a ceremony no one could speak about, and the hollow weight of what slipped away. The funeral belonged to both sides. The secrets didn't. The leak, when the secrets spilled. Secrets don't explode, they seep. After the fragment came aboard and the funeral was done, the plan shifted to a second mission. Then a reporter called with questions that were too specific to be guesses. In Washington, phones rang late. The order was simple: stall, narrow the circle, and pray the cover holds through one more season. A full exposure risked more than headlines. A public confrontation at sea, a legal brawl over piracy versus salvage in international waters, and tit-for-tat moves that could put US boats under closer, harder Soviet shadow. Stakes were obvious. Exposure meant a diplomatic crisis with nuclear undertones, a compromised technology edge, and the end of any chance to return to the site. It also meant explaining a burial at sea nobody had permission to witness. Inside Langley, they sharpened a new answer into a shield. We can neither confirm nor deny. The Glomar Response turned from a line in a lawyer's draft into doctrine in a week. Action started on the West Coast. A California paper sniffed at odd procurement and a mysterious submersible barge that vanished under a ship. Editors hesitated. The story felt unbelievable. Then Washington whispers reached a syndicated columnist known for airing secrets. He didn't have the whole operation, but he had enough shape to draw attention. Howard Hughes, a bizarre mining ship, and a mission in deep water that wasn't about nodules. The agency tried back-channel persuasion. National security lives at risk, the usual quiet pressure. Some editors blinked, others didn't. Unknown to the bylines, the White House weighed two options: deny and dare the press to print, or confirm just enough to control the blast. They chose denial with teeth. Letters went out, no comment, neither confirm nor deny, assertions of harm if details ran. It bought days, not months. Inside Situation Room briefs, the worst case played on repeat. A Soviet auxiliary demanding to board in international waters while cameras rolled, forcing a live crisis between nuclear powers. Meanwhile, the Soviets had been suspicious since the Explorer first loitered. Now their attachés clipped columns and wrote cables with underlines. In Moscow, a file labeled with the sub's hull number added a new tab: American provocation at sea. They wanted outrage without escalation. They got both. Publicly, statements condemned imperialist theft of Grav and demanded accountability. Privately, the Navy's Pacific leadership told captains to watch, log, and wait. Impact in the States landed in two tones. 1. Fascination. America had built a ship to pluck a submarine 3 miles down using a claw the size of a building. 2. Unease. If the government could invent a new industry as a lie, what else could a plausible story hide? The burial footage stayed sealed, but rumors of a ceremony softened some criticism inside the intelligence community. It didn't move the press. On the other side, Soviet planners treated the leaks as a working assumption of compromise. Tighten crypto procedures, harden safes at sea, and shadow US survey ships with less patience. Microstory. A junior FOIA officer drafted a routine acknowledgement letter, then watched legal mark it up into a template. Where the law asked for records, the answer offered a posture. The agency can neither confirm nor deny the existence of records responsive to your request. It felt like a trick. It became a standard. Courts would soon write Glomar Response into opinions, and the phrase would outlive the ship. Then a bigger outlet ran with it. The piece wasn't perfect, wrong dates here, inflated costs there, but the core was right. The CIA had tried to raise a Soviet submarine in international waters under the cover of deep-sea mining using a ship tied to Howard Hughes. That article turned the second mission calendar to dust. If the Explorer sailed again, it would be greeted by a flotilla of Soviet fishermen and a swarm of cameras. The director killed the return in a sentence. Action moved to damage control. Congressional leadership got a tighter brief, more than they'd wanted, less than they'd like. Some were impressed by the engineering. Others were alarmed by the audacity. Appropriators asked whether the money bought intelligence or just headlines. The answer depended on what memo they read. Across an ocean, the Soviets filed diplomatic notes and recalibrated patrols near the site. They couldn't prove what had been taken, but they assumed the worst: cryptographic compromise, warhead exploitation. It fueled a quieter race to harden codes and tweak safety features. They also filed the lesson: Americans will try the unthinkable if the math looks interesting. The burial tape sat until tempers shifted. Years later, as a brittle thaw settled on the old rivalry, the United States handed Moscow a copy. The images were simple: faces against wind, a flag draped respectful, stretchers tipping toward blue. For some Russian families, it was the first confirmation that someone had seen their dead. For the CIA, it was a rare moment where secrecy bent toward grace without breaking. Impact rippled into culture. Glomar left the dock and moved into language. Reporters heard the phrase and understood it as a wall you couldn't climb. Today it still anchors foyer fights and courtroom arguments. Technologists read the technical annexes that would eventually dribble into public view and built on them: dynamic positioning, heavy lift compensation, deep ocean handling. Lawyers parsed international waters with new suspicion. If a story looks like commerce and smells like strategy, maybe it's both. Human beat, easy to miss. Men who'd stood in the moon pool watched their work recast as scandal on the evening news. They couldn't defend themselves. They couldn't explain the night the claw held, the shudder, the break. They couldn't talk about the flag they ironed on a rolling deck. They sat with a private pride and a public shrug. One wrote a letter he never sent, describing '98 and the way the Risers song changed a second before the world did. In the aftermath, the secret didn't vanish. It fossilized. The operation would never be a clean win or a clean loss. It would be a shadow you could trace from leak to law, from law to culture, from culture back to the sea. The ocean kept most of the sub. The story kept just enough of the mission to change how power speaks when it doesn't want to speak at all. The legacy we live with. In the quiet after the leak, the question people kept asking was, did it work? It was, what did it change? Start with the hardware. Dynamic positioning went from exotic to expected. Holding a ship over a dot for days without anchors became a solved problem, then a platform for other secrets. Heave compensation graduated from a one-off contraption to a standard for heavy weather work, cables, and deep science. You can trace lines from that derrick to today's offshore rigs, rescue missions, and delicate undersea installs that look routine because someone bled the surprise out of the physics in 1974. Meanwhile, SOSUS got a quiet vindication. The acoustic math that led them to a grave gave planners confidence to lean on the network for more than tracking. It became a forensic tool, a way to read events after the fact and steer assets with fewer guesses. The ocean sounded different once they trusted its echoes. In a separate lane, deep recovery know-how slid into programs that still don't have names. Not claws for submarines, tools for tapping cables, placing packages, lifting lost test articles without a splash. Azorian didn't invent the urge, it handed over a kit. There was doctrine too. Undersea espionage hardened into a craft with rules. Hide in commerce when you can, in science when you must, and in silence when nothing else will hold. The cover taught a generation that a plausible lie doesn't just camouflage, it attracts. The better it fits a market's hopes, the safer the secret under it. That thinking echoed in later operations that parked audacity inside normal-looking paperwork. And SOSUS, once just ears, became a navigation crutch for black work. time difference of arrival math to steer assets to places maps never named. Stakes weren't just technical. Deterrence thinking took a nudge. If your codes, gyros, and metallurgy might end up on your rival's bench, then safety margins and crypto discipline aren't domestic debates, they're national survival. In Moscow, whatever they truly believed about the hall, they behaved as if the Americans had touched more than steel. Code procedures tightened. Hardware designs edged toward more robust interlocks. In Washington, a different lesson landed. You can reach places you tell yourself are unreachable, but you don't control what you bring up or what you break on the way. Human beats survived under the policy. Families from Rybachi lived with a sentence that never softened, missing. Years later, some saw the burial tape and found a thin kind of closure. Strangers had done right by their dead. It didn't answer the why. It acknowledged the who. On the American side, a handful of engineers and sailors carried a private ledger. They'd built something that wasn't supposed to exist, watched it work, watched it fail, then went home without a story they could tell their kids. Pride sat next to the ache of what slipped away. Crook and Graham's names rarely made print. Their fingerprints were welded into a ship that pretended to be something else. Complications didn't retire. Redactions still striped the record. Veterans disagree about what sat on those scaffolds in the moon pool, crypto of consequence, or only lessons in materials and manufacturing. Some insiders say enough came up to tune assumptions about Soviet doctrine. Others call it an engineering demo draped in strategic hope. Both positions find support in the fragments the public can read. The truth stubbornly lives where classification and memory overlap. While that debate ran, the Glomar Response left its birth certificate and wandered into everyday law. Agencies across the government learned to neither confirm nor deny as a way to guard the existence of secrets, not just their contents. FOIA lawyers call it a doctrine. Reporters call it a wall. Either way, the phrase that once shielded a ship now shapes fights about surveillance, data, and rights far from the Pacific. Micro-story, easy to miss. A modern offshore crew sets a small submersible on a cable in rough weather, their ship holding station within feet, the deck gang moving to a choreography that looks practiced to the point of boredom. The chief tells a trainee to watch the heave comp gauge and wait for the dip before the clamp. The machine breathes with the sea. Somewhere in that rhythm is the ghost of a program no one names out loud. Legacy is also restraint. After the leak, plans for a second lift curled at the edges and went into drawers. The message to future audacity was never again. It was count the circles of risk the press adds. Technical risk plus diplomatic risk plus narrative risk. If the sum gets too high, ingenuity sits on its hands. That math didn't stop later undersea operations. It made them smaller, quieter, and meaner about what plausible looks like. In the end, what we live with is a split screen. On one side, a leap in capability that turned the deep ocean from a barrier into a workplace. On the other, a set of questions that refuse to resolve. Was the intelligence worth the danger? Does honoring the dead change the ethics of disturbing their grave? Can a democracy do this kind of thing and stay honest with itself? The ship is gone, the claw is on a different job, the men are old or missing. The sea still covers the rest. The lesson holds. The hardest secrets are the ones that make you better and leave you with debt. Counterfactuals and what-ifs. Here's the question nobody can leave alone. What if the lift hadn't broken? Play it forward. The forward section clears the fracture, the tines hold, and 100+ feet of K-129 rises clean into the moon pool. The doors shut. Pumps roar. Inside, teams find not fragments but compartments. Intact cable runs, sealed lockers, consoles with labels that match the manuals US analysts only guessed at. The prize list jumps from metallurgy and torpedo guts to doctrine. Stakes sharpen immediately. Intact crypto material would have been the crown, rotors, key lists, procedural guides quiet about shortcut sailors used at sea. With that, NSA could map real-world Soviet message discipline, not the textbook version. Even if the codes had rolled since 1968, habits don't change as fast as tables. Guidance systems for the SSN-5, gyros, inertial packages, environmental shielding, would have shown accuracy assumptions, failure modes, and safety interlocks. Warhead housings, if present, might have revealed fusing design and permissive action logic, confirming or challenging US beliefs about Soviet custody of nukes at sea. Action branches with escalation risk. Suppose word leaked after a full, intact haul. Public outrage in Moscow would be sharper because it wouldn't just be a grave touched, it'd be a vault robbed. Soviet admirals, already nursing losses from 1968, might push for a visible response. Hard shadowing of US salvage and survey ships, harassment runs, a bump that creates film and fury. Washington would be forced to posture, likely with innocent passage, language and escorts, tightening a spiral no one wanted. There's another path, caught in the act. Picture a Soviet trawler closer than the crew realized, cameras rolling as the moon pool doors crack just enough to show a curved shadow. Or a helicopter forcing a landing attempt that ends with blades over the deck and a radio shouting boarding demands. The red folder with emergency destruction orders gets real. The crew dumps sensitive kit over the side. Welders touch off shaped charges to ruin the claw, and the ship becomes a stage for maritime lawyers. International waters don't end the argument, they start it. The legal position, finders keepers in the high seas, runs into desecration of war grave and provocation claims. Crisis managers scramble. The White House denies specifics, the Soviets mobilize patrols, and the second mission dies on the vine, along with a few careers. Flip the counterfactual to legalities. If Azorian had brought the whole forward section home, Congress would still have been briefed in whispers, but oversight might have stiffened earlier. More committees, more staffers, more chances for a leak. The Glomar Response would have faced faster challenges in court as FOIA requests chased rumors. Neither confirm nor deny might have hit a judge's gavel sooner, setting case law with a harder edge or a narrower scope. Operationally, a clean success likely births a program rather than a one-off. The lesson wouldn't just be that lifting is possible, it'd be that exploitation pays. Budget lines grow for ocean engineering, cover stories iterate, and the HMB-1 becomes a shuttle for a series of quiet recoveries. Lost missiles, downed aircraft, test articles with sensors nobody admits were on them. Ivy Bell's style cable work already existed. Azorian's proof would have accelerated the appetite for touching anything on the seafloor that could talk. But there's a shadow to the bright scenario. A full haul means more remains. The burial becomes larger, longer, and harder to hide. Families in Kamchatka might sense something through rumor and timing, pushing the Kremlin to protest earlier and harder. And ethically, the weight grows. Engineers who already carried a private ache would carry more. The tape, when finally shared, would land heavier, comfort to some, raw salt to others. There's one more what, for second mission before the leak. Weather holds, Soviet attention wanders, and the Explorer returns with a redesigned claw, more tines, different pads, a load path that avoids the fracture. They grab the aft. Best case, the crypto safe sits where planners guessed, and it opens in a Langley lab under floodlights and gloves. Worst case, the aft is rubble and the price is a near accident, another shudder that almost takes men with it. Either way, the line between brilliance and catastrophe stays thin. In the end, these counterfactuals don't rewrite the meaning, they clarify it. The operation always lived on a razor, genius on one side, crisis on the other. Success would have changed the footnotes. The risk was the headline. Act breaks, cliffhangers, and open loops. Here, what refuses to settle. We still don't know exactly what was read in those windowless rooms when technicians opened the salvaged boxes. Some say there were crypto fragments that mapped Soviet habits. Others say the haul was hardware without keys. The memos that could answer wear thick black ink like armor. Meanwhile, something else was happening in the Shadow's Azorian cast. Quiet teams took the heave comp lessons and went hunting cables. They practiced placing objects on the seabed without leaving fingerprints, the way a locksmith learns to feel tumblers instead of forcing locks. If you've heard whispers about taps in cold northern seas, this is the lineage. What nobody knew at the time was that the burial tape would become the human hinge of the whole mission. We've seen frames, men steady in the wind, a red flag smoothed on an improvised bier, stretchers tipping to the Pacific. But the tape doesn't show names or the letters that never reached families, or the 10 seconds of silence before the first body slid into the water. It leaves a gap that matters. This was the moment everything changed for secrecy law, too. The Glomar Response walked out of a letter and into the courts, then into agencies that now kneecap curiosity with those 5 words. Every modern FOIA fight that ends with neither confirm nor deny echoes a ship holding station over a grave no one could admit existed. 3 days earlier in our story, a second mission still felt possible. Engineers had sketches for a stiffer strongback, more tines, and a way to cradle around the fracture that betrayed them. Then the leaks hit, and that future went brittle. The open loop sits right there. If the Explorer had sailed again, would the Soviets have swarmed her, or would the ocean have kept its secret twice? Unknown to them, across town, a different archive holds models and mock-ups, moon pool plans, tine cross-sections, pipe taper drawings, that survived in file cabinets and garages. Some surfaced in museums and corporate basements. Others disappeared into auctions and attics. The physical memory of the mission is scattered like its target. While that was happening in Washington, a new generation of undersea infrastructure quietly drew lines across the map. Fiber optic cables thicker than a wrist, power interconnectors, sensor nets that listen to continents talk. The operating question shifted. If you proved you can reach that deep and be believed to be doing something else, what stops you from visiting a cable you don't own? That loop isn't closed. It's current events. Human loop still open, 98 sailors whose last watch ended in March 1968. Their families have pieces, official notifications, rumors, a tape of strangers doing right at sea. What they don't have is why. Some believe ignition in a missile tube. Some whisper collision. The ocean won that argument and keeps winning it. Strategic loop. Deterrence depends on assumptions about what the other side can touch. Azorian told both sides the floor isn't off limits. That shaped patrol patterns, hardened safes, and rewrote checklists. It also seeded a mindset. When something vital vanishes into deep water, satellite stages, drones, test pods, someone is already asking, can we build another Glomar for this? Plot twist we still haven't resolved. That fracture line. Was it just impact physics or a flaw echoed across boats of that class? US analysts drew conclusions from grain, weld, and fatigue. Russian builders drew theirs from loss and pride. Neither set of answers got shouted. They got built into steel quietly. So we leave with threads tugging at the edge of the frame. A funeral tape that softened enemies, a doctrine that hardened secrecy, a toolkit that made the abyss a workplace, and a debt to the dead that didn't go away when the moon pool doors shut. Everything else is redacted or resting under 3 miles of water. The heist proved the deep ocean isn't a sanctuary. It's a stage where audacity meets consequence and leaves a debt we still carry. If you want the sequel, how Azorian's toolbox fuels today's quiet battles over undersea cables and seabed sensors, subscribe and jump to our follow-up on covert ocean warfare. New episodes drop weekly. The next chapter is already live.